The following podcast contains opinions from paid professionals. The information provided in this podcast is general in nature and not advice. For free and confidential support, call 1800 858 858 or visit gamblinghelponline.org.au.
Episode 7 of So We Think, as we head towards the Caulfield Guineas, the Toorak Handicap and the Might and Power, the three Group 1s at Caulfield on Saturday, and a card at Rosehill Gardens that has plenty of prize money to it, as I welcome in Ben Way, and we get straight into the accountability check of last week. And geez, there's actually a lot to unpack, Ben, starting with Autumn Glow. We were hot on her for the Flight Stakes, but on Friday morning she was scratched, and stablemate Lady Shenandoah walks away the victor.
So we're just going to gloss over the fact that you've abandoned me and headed south to greener pastures. Hey, it was a shame the favourite wasn't there, and I know it stole a moment. It stole a moment from you working on Channel 7, of course, doing the post-race interviews, and I know you were already squirreling and working out what you were going to ask James about his big 100, and that moment got taken from us, but we got another moment to replace it. In fact, plenty. Thought the Metrop was one of the great races, you know, those two doing battle over the last couple of hundred. The Epsom is always a fantastic race, and you touch on Lady Shenandoah. Now, you're pretty close to the camp. You've been hearing the same whispers that I have, that Autumn Glow is just this superstar. You know, they were going to scratch Lady Shenandoah because she was no match for Autumn Glow and send Lady Shenandoah to 1,000 guineas or something like that. That may still be the plan with her, but now it's kind of, they've tinkered with the prep a bit. She made a mess of them, and we talked about it on Tuesday night on one of our shows. Her win actually outrated the performance of Autumn Glow the start prior. If she didn't elevate her performance, Lady Shenandoah would have matched her or beaten her. So my question to you is Autumn Glow seriously a couple of lengths better than that horse we saw on Saturday?
It's a great question. Chatting to Chris Waller post-race and also Guy Mulcaster, who selected the filly at the yearling sales, they always thought that Lady Shenandoah was a Flight Stakes potential winner in waiting. In Chris's words, until Autumn Glow came along. So I guess in terms of stable rankings, they do still have Autumn Glow on top, with Lady Shenandoah obviously a very narrow second behind her. But I found that really interesting that they did reference the fact that in terms of how they rank their fillies in the stables, yes, Autumn Glow was maybe a fair bit above her, but credit where credit's due to that filly. She was amazing on Saturday. Great steer from Zach Lloyd, getting his second Group 1 and very narrowly missing out on making it a Group 1 double on the day in the Metropolitan, where he was beaten a half nose on board Zardozi. But yeah, it's a great question, and the exciting thing for both of those fillies going forward is that we will get to see them go head to head, presumably in the autumn, on a number of occasions when they're still in their 3-year-old year. So, gosh, the future is bright for those two, and I think we're going to have some good clashes on our hands.
Absolutely. And every time you see these fillies turned mares come through for Chris Waller and they reach the end, or they sort of start to mature and you think, how many seasons have they got left? He just has another crop come through and they're equally as good, if not better in some occasions. Via Sistina bounced back, and we learned a real lesson on the weekend, and I don't know why we need to keep learning it. And to be honest, we kind of suggested this last week, so I'll give us a tick even if we don't deserve it. You've got to learn the art of forgiveness in punting and in racing. We saw it with Pride of Jenny, where she was able to bounce back, albeit she didn't win on the bounce back. And then Via Sistina, who has jumped from an SP profile, has jumped a short price favourite the start prior, not forgotten about, but certainly got to a very backable price on the weekend. And congratulations to anyone who jumped in, because she was back, maybe not to her best, but pretty close.
That was her highest rating performance of her Australian career so far. So that was, on ratings, the best performance that she's put in here. And now she heads to a Cox Plate where you've got to give her a chance. We've also spoken on the show before about Waller horses second up during these big carnivals and how they can sometimes face a dip. And we've seen that a number of times. So Jolie Star was the same, Via Sistina. It's actually an interesting lesson going into an Everest with Jolie Star, isn't it? Because she failed, or inverted commas, failed behind Sunshine in Paris in that race at Rosehill Gardens a few weeks back, and I just would not be doubting her to be in tip-top shape going into the Everest in only a week's time. And that leads us to our next reflection from last week in terms of the premiere. And think about it. So last year's reigning Everest winner doesn't get a slot in the Everest. It was a really strangely run race, really slow from the get-go, a walk and then a sprint home, which didn't suit those back markers. But, that's the brutality of these slots is that, and that's the reality of it. He will not find himself in the Everest. Of course, Private Eye, he's put in a couple of really good performances, I thought, this campaign so far. And I liked the trial on Tuesday as well. He finds himself in the $20 million race.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong at any point here, but talking about the Everest, if someone was to be a late withdrawal, you have emergencies, it's always going to be a full field. And Racing New South Wales have a specific template because, otherwise owners could hold the slot holders to complete ransom to fill that spot at the last minute, right? So if an emergency gets run, they actually have a template for how prize money would be broken up. I'm not hoping that happens, but if it were to happen and think about it was the next horse in line, the deal that they would get as being an emergency through the template is so far and away better than any deal they've been offered. I've had the luxury of having a look at an offer from a slot who I won't name. And if they finished any worse than 6th in the Everest, the slot holder would get the entire prize money. In fact,
Wow.
the only position where it was 50-50 was for first. So if they didn't win the Everest, they're actually better winning the Sydney Stakes, where you get around $1 million for first in a $2 million race, and not splitting it with anyone. And I think that's maybe the bit that's lost on people is the fact that we've got a $2 million race as an encore, an appetizer, but depending on what you were offered, it's actually a pretty good cherry on top for many.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept that we have the Sydney Stakes on the same day as a consolation prize in a way. It's an interesting concept in itself, and it gives those horses who didn't make the final field for the Everest, and we predict that, think about it, Overpass, the likes of those guys will be in that field. It'll be a spectacle in itself. In terms of the storylines for this week and the Everest, so the field is nearly set. We're not ready, set, go. We're nearly set because Coolmore are holding out in terms of confirming Stormboy for this big event. Gai Waterhouse last week at track work at Flemington coming out saying, yes, we're going straight to the Everest. That's the plan with this son of Justify. We're going to the Everest and that will be his race. And Coolmore still now have not confirmed it, even though they put jockey Brenton Abdullah from Hong Kong on standby to come and ride him at that lightweight, 53 kilos in the Everest. It's really interesting because were they waiting for the Group 1 status that we've got this week with the Everest? Were they waiting for that? Are they waiting to see what Switzerland does this weekend? Maybe they're holding their cards close to their chest there. Are they waiting for the weather forecast? I find it fascinating that they're still crossing those T's and dotting those I's, so to speak.
Yeah, and so immediately the cynics, we all start to think, is all not as it seems. Every time they seem to be asked whether he's definitely in, there's an affirmative answer without conviction, and we just keep going, why? And the Group 1 aspect would make sense, but I have a feeling there's maybe more to it. But I really hope we see him there, and it does strip the race of something because we're all looking for a leader. Now, he maybe doesn't jump well enough, depending on his barrier, to lead up an Everest field anyway. But assuming he does, at least there'll be some tempo there. Beyond that, I mean, we've got IME who'll take a forward position, but there's not much there. It kind of reminds me of the first couple of editions of the Everest, and we saw what happened there. It was a bit of a walkathon, and the leader prevailed.
You would expect Lady of Camelot, she'll go forward. She'd be an on-pace kind of leader in that race along with IME, and then Stormboy. I mean, to bring those back markers into it, Giga Kick, what do we make of his performance last week? To be really fair, in the yard, I was actually with Clayton Douglas, and yes, he had taken improvement, but he still looked like he would take more improvement, if you know what I mean. So he will obviously come on again from that run. He needs tempo on. I wish I win. Of course, he needs tempo on. So you do want Storm Boy in the race so that it is a genuinely run 1,200 metres.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed, because we've lost a little bit of the speed out of it. I do think we've lost something with Think About It not being in. I think there's something nice about having last year's winner in there to defend the crown, and it feels a touch unfair, and that's racing. But it feels a touch unfair that he doesn't get that chance. But that's just me.
In terms of what we just mentioned, the Everest becoming a Group 1 this week, along with the All-Star Mile, finally, thank you, Racing Australia, for getting this done in a timely manner so that we can actually have this race as a Group 1 this year. I would have just been tearing my hair out if that decision was made post the running of the Everest this year. I did want to mention and pull out one little quote from the media release from Racing Australia yesterday when they announced this news about the elevation of both of those races. The press release reads, following the recent agreement and adoption of the Australian Black Type Guidelines by the Racing Australia Board, a review of races under those guidelines is being conducted. So over the last few days, we have had a number of races receive Black Type status, whether that be listed Group 3, 2 or 1. I think there are a few races, mainly in Victoria and in New South Wales, that have got to watch themselves. They are under scrutiny at the moment from the Racing Australia Board and this Black Type Pattern Committee. I think there's races at risk of losing their Group 1, Group 2 or Group 3 status going forward. And that has to be the case. Otherwise, we are in an absolute sea of Black Type races.
Yeah, so you're saying there's give and take, but we've only heard about the give so far.
The take will come.
The take will come. I'll bet the take comes after the Everest.
100%.
but that's just me. So, yeah, the give and take. So suddenly you start looking at those races and, far be it for us to be identifying some. We've talked about a couple of Group 1s that we thought maybe were on the fringe now. But you're completely right about the Black Top. You can't continue to add without taking away because then it does devalue. And it is a constant balance. I'm all for innovation. It's a constant balance between new concepts being rewarded with Black Type status and respect for history and maintaining races which have lived for a very long time and have maybe felt the brunt of changes. Suddenly if the prize money hasn't been there to support races that historically have been particularly strong, trainers are now bypassing them. I think there's still some tinkering to be done, and we'll work it all out. But the Pattern Committee have tough work there. That's one job I'm glad I don't have, Em.
I know. It would be a difficult decision to make, and not everybody's going to be happy with the take that inevitably has to happen. And if it doesn't, we are going to continue to add more races to this pattern, and it's just, I think it becomes a joke. So the take has to happen. I love the give that's happened this week, but the take has to happen. An issue that's popped up in Melbourne this week that has definitely caught my attention, and I think many other people's as well, is the programming of Pride of Jenny. Obviously, she was crowned Australian Racehorse of the Year this week. I mean, that's a completely different scenario altogether in terms of that event. Held at this time of year, I'm not a big fan of rotating the event to every city around Australia. I don't know if that's the solution. I know it's the Racing Australia Awards, but that we have a couple of racing meccas and they would definitely grab more interest, more press, more attendees, etc. But so that's one thing. The events, I think, went a bit missing, and I would love to see them return to their former glory, 15, 20 years ago when it was a 1,000 people event in Crown in Melbourne, and it was a big must attend thing, and to be crowned Horse of the Year was such a prestigious honour. It feels a little bit lost at the moment. But the other thing is Kieran Maher throwing in noms, the Toorak Handicap and the Might and Power. And he was questioned by stewards over this during the week, whether it was a, quote, manipulation of possible weights for both of these races. But the thing that comes out of it that has really piqued my interest is the fact that he has been very clear that he would love for the mare to stay in Melbourne, have 2 weeks in between runs before she goes to the Cox Plate in 2 weeks' time. But instead, the owner has pulled rank, so to speak, and he wants that King Charles III. He wants to see her go up there and go back to back in these two massive clashes at Royal Randwick and then get on the float and go down to Moonee Valley. What are your thoughts?
So you're reading into that statement, I assume, from Kieran Maher, where he said, I would have preferred this, but the owner has suggested this. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that's what he said. He said, I certainly was keen to keep her in Melbourne, but it is Tony's great wish that we also head to a King Charles. And
so my
I don't know.
my thought there, and I like Kieran. I hope he still likes me after I say this. My thought there is that he got called in about it. You know, stewards have said, hey, you're unlikely to run in this race. Are you just playing with the weight scale? He said, no, we genuinely have intentions to run here or run there, right? So then when he eventually and inevitably doesn't run in those races, he kind of has to say, I had intention to run here, but the owner wanted to run somewhere else. So is it covering your bases and sticking to your story, or is it a conflict of planning between the owner and the trainer? Now, taking it on face value and assuming that statement is spot on and it is a conflict between owner and trainer and he would have preferred to stay in Melbourne, and I'm happy to accept that. It probably is the case. Then surely Kieran Maher gets to pull rank. I know you're the owner and I know you pay the bills, but if he's decided the best way to win a Cox Plate with Pride of Jenny is X, as an owner, I'm sticking with that. I'm not offering up Y.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because we've seen some owners in the past, some, really invested, very smart and very knowledgeable owners, e.g. Lloyd Williams. He's one of those who, he's a real student of racing. He's great at picking out imports and bringing them to Australia to run, particularly in those cups. He has definitely had a big hand in the programming of some of those stayers over the past 20, 30 years. Like, there's no doubting that. But in terms of this one, look, I think she's brilliant enough to win a King Charles. I do think she's brilliant enough, and she will run them ragged over the 2,040 metres at Moonee Valley for a Cox Plate. Like, I think she's truly good enough to win both of those races. But both on the quick backup with the travel, I do have concerns over that. Not knowing the horse intricately, and that's one thing, but honest to God, that is a big ask. That is a huge ask for any horse to be able to do that.
It is, but you can't help but feel she's just one that, thrives on more racing. And the bigger the fitness gets, the bigger that petrol tank gets, and the more brazen they get up on speed with her. If they do go down that path, I would never question them. I will say, to the argument I guess we haven't really touched on, I don't think she was ever running in Melbourne, do you?
Oh, I'm sure the Melbourne Racing Club would have loved to have seen a Mr. Brightside Pride of Jenny battle on Caulfield Guineas Day. Look, it's hard to know, but just reading between the lines of Kieran's statement, I think in terms of a trainer trying to program a horse's schedule for the next couple of weeks, 2 weeks in between runs leading into a Cox Plate makes a bit more sense to me than travel up to Sydney and being on the quick backup. But again, I'm not a trainer.
Well, they asked the question. He gave the only answer he was ever going to give, and they accepted that answer. So we might as well accept that answer. But it does beg the question, unless he was going to incriminate himself, what's the point of even asking as stewards?
Yeah.
Anyways,
Caulfield Guineas this weekend, and Broadsiding is the short-priced favourite to go back-to-back, winning the Golden Rose first up over the 1,400, goes down to Melbourne, gets over a trip he obviously enjoys. He's won a Group 1 over the mile before already. Is he home?
I think so. And I like a quaddie. I don't like winning a quaddie, evidently, because I don't do it very often. But I do like having a quaddie every week. If Mr. Brightside wins and Broadsiding wins and another Will wins, that's putting a lot of pressure on the race with Mornington Glory. What is it, the Scalacci? We need a big blowout there, or this quaddie's paying $15. Honestly,
Yeah.
I think Broadside and Mr. Brightside win. Your read?
Yeah, I think Mr. Brightside definitely. I think his competition in the race. But in terms of that might and power with Mr. Brightside, like a Tissue, she's a really good mare. She gets James McDonald on board. Deny Knowledge is one that I could probably have a play on second up. Gets over a 2,000 metre trip, which would suit her. Coco Sun's another one who finally gets to that distance that she really enjoys, but he looks home there. Then in terms of the guineas, I mean, he's $1.55 at the moment broadsiding, and he's got to be the colt of a generation. But first time to Melbourne, there has to be a slot, like a very, and I don't want to mock the horse because I think he's an out and out star. I think he could be a superstar of the future, a champion. He's already been crowned 2-year-old champion of the year. But if there is one slight, tiny, minuscule query, it is going to Caulfield for the first time.
You've still got to find a horse to beat him.
Yeah.
And there are talents. There are talents in behind, but nearly of those that he's raced, it's hard to see them turning the tables. And the others, you wonder whether they've got the quality there. So if the best broadsiding rocks up, I'm not too worried about Caulfield. I kind of get that point because I think it is a bit of a horses for courses track. But if the best broadsiding rocks up, he wins. Another Will and Antino. I agree with you. I think Antino's run was fantastic last time out against two absolute stars. But another Will is the emerging star. And I do think that that'll kind of follow market order as well. Hey, we've got good races in Sydney too. The race I know it might not be the headline act prize money-wise, but the race I'm probably most looking forward to would be the Gloaming. We get to see Swift Falcon, Henline, Tenbury Wells, and this is a race that's going to change the complexion of a spring champion market, which I know you're invested in. And it could well impact the Derby market. In fact, it will impact the Derby market. I genuinely think Tenbury Wells is a huge Derby chance based off what we've seen, albeit at the provincial so far. And today's not D-Day, but I want to at least see it giving a strong showing. What's your read for the Gloaming?
No doubting that with Tenbury Wells. He's a horse on the up. He comes out of a provincial race, so it's a big step up in grade on Saturday, albeit he competed in these hot Group 1s and Group 2s as a 2-year-old. But I think going towards a Derby, he's the horse that I'll have eyes for flashing home late. In terms of Swift Falcon, he was brilliant last Saturday. He's on the quick backup. They've found the key to this guy. You don't back up these horses, especially in these kind of races, unless you're really confident. And so the Hawks team at the moment, they are on just an upward trajectory. They are flying at the moment. They've had, I think, 3 stakes winners in 2 Saturdays. Macarena, we saw Swift Falcon last weekend as well. So they're in a rich vein of form. Henlane's the interesting one, and you're right. I do have something at stake here in terms of futures bets, but don't mention that to me because I also had something at stake with a futures bet with Autumn Glow last Saturday as well, as many did. So, but you go and take a look at his last start down in Melbourne at Moonee Valley that night where he finished, he flashed home behind Evaporate, who lines up in a Caulfield Guineas. Ooh, I'm not sure the 1,800 metres is nearly enough. He might need the extra 200 in the Spring Champion Stakes in a couple of weeks' time, but this colt by Done Deal, he's a flashy type. He's a beautiful horse. And everything that happened at Moonee Valley 2 weeks ago, they're spacing his runs 2 weeks apart. So that's why he did go back down to Melbourne. Says to me that he is nearly on full cylinders heading towards a Gloaming and then a Spring Champion.
Yeah, it feels a bit apples and oranges, but Swift Falcon's run rated higher. And then you've got Henlan's run, which was, is coming out of better company, and the form out of those races has looked good. So how do they marry up? My read might be similar to you. If Swift Falcon's going to have a day. I think it's probably Saturday in the Gloaming.
Yeah.
I think it turns towards Hanlon once we get to a spring champion. And then Tenbury Wells, we'll just see. Might find that turn of foot a little bit too sharp on Saturday, but once we get out to a Derby trip, I think we'll see that horse's best. So, yeah, those markets available at Tab. October 26th, the spring champion, and the Derby, of course, on November 2. Currently, broadsiding $4.50 favourite, Handline $6 and Tenbury Wells around 11. But
so you wouldn't have thought that broadsiding would be heading to a spring champion.
That's a Derby market, sorry, that one.
Oh, sorry.
So yeah,
Sorry.
so my thought there is that's probably, I'd put that in the unlikely pile too, I think.
Yes, 100%.
So now might be a time to have a bet into that if you sort of want to play around the
at your own risk.
Yeah, because if he does,
At your peril.
because if he walks in the Caulfield Guineas and they say, "Hey, we're heading straight to the Derby," yeah, you're going to be getting better than $11. About Tenbury Wells would be the read there. So the Hill Stakes,
Yes.
we shouldn't gloss over a race worth a couple of million. Royal Patronage was fantastic. In fact, it's been fantastic the past few starts. $3.50, Pericles $4.20, and Kovalika $5.50. Kovalika didn't have a stack of luck on the weekend.
No luck, to be honest. He was trapped behind a wall of horses and found it difficult to flash through the gap, but I thought he closed really nicely. And again, he's one on the quick backup that I don't think you can discount. I know he hasn't won a race since that Queensland Derby, but particularly his last two runs, so this preparation, he is showing us glimpses and efforts towards the end of his races that he's building towards something. So maybe that's this weekend. Interesting, I think, due to Gates, that they've opted to keep Pericles in Sydney. He was also nommed down there. So is this his opportunity to win a big money race? Of course, it's not a Group 1, but I think we've discussed before, I'm not quite sure that he is a true Group 1 week in, week out, weight for age performer. So maybe this is his race. The other one, though, is Golden Path for the Price and Kent Junior team, who comes out of that really hot Kingston town. That was won by Elias. Of course, he ran third in the Turnbull last week. Second was Chaelwolf, who came out and won an Epsom. Like, it as a form reference has been unbelievable over the last couple of weeks. He's one I might be keen to have an each-way play on.
Hey, it's just occurred to me. So you know how we do our accountability check each week?
Yeah.
So I think there should almost be a retrospective. Can we take that back? So if you rewind, the only reason I bring it up now is I was just thinking about Team Hawks, and I thought, Emma asked me which stable was going to have a big spring and elevate themselves.
Is this a self-pat?
And I said, Team Hawks, they're airborne. You asked me which jockey. I said, there's only one you can have your eyes on, and that's Zach Lloyd to continue flying. We said Via Sistina is the best horse of the three, Pride of Jenny, Mr. Brightside. And then we got made to look like absolute mugs, and we put our hand up and said, sorry, got that wrong. We're idiots. Just ignore us. Maybe we're not that far off the mark. The other one
that was successful.
The other one, this isn't all about me, mostly.
Oh.
But Storm Boy, you kind of said, I think they're up against it here. 20 plus million, whatever they've spent, they're going to need a big ticket item, and I'm not sure they're going to get it. They might get it in the Everest, but you retracted after that first up win. And I told you at the time, I said, Emma, you got to stick to your guns. You know, it's one win. This still isn't the big ticket item. You said, no. He's the second coming of Jesus Christ. I changed my mind. Right? My thought is you might end up around the mark there. Now, we are wrong more than we're right. But my point is that racing is a fickle game and it changes week to week. And, you know, we're all about the storylines and maybe putting our neck out there on the odd occasion. Some you get right, some you get wrong, but I think we need to look at it holistically. Do you mind if I talk about the midweeks for a sec?
Yes, I did tune in to a bit of you at the Kenzo yesterday.
Sorry.
For those who are tuning in, watching, yes, I'm not with Ben today because I'm at the Bathurst 1000. I'm actually in the truck before they start first practice. and I'm getting harassed in a move because I'm in a spot where someone much more important than me should be pressing buttons and getting this to air. So that's why this looks different. But I did tune into a bit of the midweeks, and there was something that happened in the last race that has upset the piece.
It has. So we didn't know it had happened, and maybe a more astute host would have picked up on it at the time. But Greenbelt and United Kingdom in the last race, they went tooth and nail, final 200. It looked, to all intents and purposes, though United Kingdom would go straight past, and Greenbelt just kept on rallying. United Kingdom probably either peaked or had a think. Either way, just couldn't get there. And people talk about jockeys throwing the kitchen sink. James McDonald on United Kingdom, he threw the kitchen sink, the laundry sink, the bathtub, absolutely the spa, everything at this horse, like everything, and just couldn't get it over the line. Anyway, it subsequently come out, and it's in the steward's notes that Chad Schofield, who was on Green Belt, exceeded the whip by 4, and they fined him accordingly. But one aspect to the little steward's report was they said that they had factored in the number of whip strikes that he exceeded the regulations by and the margin. And the margin was 0.02. And I thought that is a strange thing to reference, given in New South Wales we've never had a protest upheld based on whip use, but clearly they're factoring in the margin into the punishment for the jockey who exceeds the whip use. So it got me thinking to a discussion we've had several times. We need to either, I get it, the rule is probably there for optics. I think most in racing accept that. We need to be seen to be doing something. Most of us agree the whip isn't cruel in any way. It doesn't hurt horses. But optically, it's not a good look, so we need to rectify it and limit the amount of whips a horse gets, particularly over the concluding stages. Fine. But you can't have horses winning by 0.02 when they exceed the whip use. Stewards accept that it may have played a part in the result. They've mentioned that in their steward's report. And yet there's no grounds for protest because the owners of the second horse don't know that until they read the steward's report. The rule is just needs some tinkering, I think.
The rule needs overhauling because I don't think you can expect jocks, especially in high pressure situations, to be counting and then to also be noting when they make, like, what if you strike and you're at the 100, but that's counted not in the, it's the area. There's obviously it's a cut and dry rule, but there's too much room for error with it. And I agree that going forward, I mean, most jurisdictions, there's very few that have banned the whip. I don't think we're ever going to see ourselves do that. Speaking to a number of jockeys over the last couple of years, they do need it for safety reasons to be able to almost guide. And it's not always with using it. Sometimes it's using it in front so that they can guide a horse. You can see often if you go and have a look at replays, like watch the way the whip is variously used, whether it is to help them steer a course, to go straight, or to get back on track. So I don't think we're ever going to see that. But the fact that it's count this many, like that's silly. It's silly. And I think it should be maybe at a totality for the entire race.
Well, where the evidence I think that it's broken is that when it gets to a big race, there is an unspoken rule that you just don't worry about it.
Pay the fine.
You win the race, you pay the fine, because the fact of the matter is you're better off to win the race rather than risk losing because you didn't encourage your horse as much as the bloke next to you. And you've got one guy who's stuck to the rules. Now, this isn't a shot at Chad. He just happens to be the jockey that was relevant yesterday. But you've got one that stuck to the rules, one that didn't. And the one that stuck to the rules has been beaten by 0.02. The stewards say that was relevant to the finish and will include it in the jockey's fine. But you've got no chance of overturning. I don't agree with calls to have a template where you say, right, 4 additional whips is worth.
Oh, you don't know
5 inches, because they if they could have quantified that, they would have quantified that already.
You can't quantify it because and all animals are different, and all race circumstances and race shapes and patterns and distances, and it's all so different. So it's something that they will not be able to quantify definitively, because there's so many different variables taken into account in every single race that we hold. But there is something that I look at the way that the rule is structured at the moment, and how much you're asking these guys to count and think, and it does my head in.
I completely agree. And is there room to maybe have a threshold where if you breach it by a certain amount, you simply lose the race? Is that too far the other way? I think it is too far, but there's got to be a ramification beyond a small fine for a jockey, because the difference between first and second in terms of prize money is so big and so significant. Not to mention, in some races, we're talking long-term breeding rights, etc., etc. Eventually, we saw it in Melbourne, they had a dead heat and they simply had to overturn it. I think we're going to reach a point where it happens in New South Wales as well.
Yeah, no doubting that.
Anyway,
any final plays for the weekend?
No, not overly, but you know where you can get them. Thursday nights, 7 p.m, Black Bookers, Sky Thoroughbred Central. We'll catch you guys there.
He's done it again. Hey, next week, we're actually going to have 2 EPs for you next week. 2 EPs. We're going to have one on Monday and then one on Thursday, because now we're getting into the nitty-gritty, the grand final territory in terms of the Group 1 $20 million Everest, plus the Group 1 Caulfield Cup. We're going to go to 2 EPs a week to make sure that you're all across all the big issues, and hopefully chat to some of the big participants in the game as well to get their thoughts on the races that have happened and also going forward.
Yeah, well, Thursdays is a bit late for a recap, isn't it? We kind of recap our own musings, but results-wise, I think there's going to be a lot of talking points coming Monday. All of the issues they've simmered away for a while, and we can unpack them, which will be good fun. I think it's important at this time of year to have the two. So Monday and Thursday going forward. Good luck on the weekend, Em, and good luck with your Henlon Spring Champion long-term bet. I hope at least you hit the line strongly.
I want to hit the line strongly. I don't need to be winning on the weekend, but I'd love to see him hitting the line stylishly and then heading towards the Spring Champion with T-Berry on board. I know he's really excited to ride this colt again. So, here's my one that I've got big eyes for over the next few weeks. Thank you for tuning in to So We Think. We'll catch you on Monday.
Enjoy Bathurst.
You win some, you lose more. For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.